From Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well wherever you are in the world. And over the course of the past month or couple months or so, it's been my great pleasure and honor to share with you a number of films that I strongly recommend. And they can be films that for instance, are in the Criterion Collection, or maybe they're films that aren't necessarily in the Criterion Collection. That's not a prerequisite per se. But more broadly, I suppose, or more generally from my point of view, these are films that I, for whatever reason, really admire quite deeply, to the point where I think that I feel very confident in being able to recommend these particular titles for one reason or another. So today, if you don't mind, I'd very much like to share with you yet another film that I think is very worthy of exploration and examination, as well as being a very dense and complex entertainment. That is also something that indicates or expresses or otherwise speaks to many specific aspects of society, in particular Japanese society, that I think are very relevant to me directly in an interesting, fascinating way. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this film, which is from 2016. This is the film Shin Godzilla, or Shin Gojira. And this is the U.S. Blu-ray that I have, but this is the Japanese Blu-ray right here that I have. It's a pretty big set. This is from 2016, and this is from Toho Studios. Hideaki Anno and co-director Shinji Higuchi created this film, which is, on the one hand, it's a Godzilla film, so it's a sort of kaiju monster film, but it is also alternatively a film that speaks to many pressing and direct and relevant aspects of current Japanese society, as well as being a really thrilling, surprising, and very suspenseful bit of entertainment that's also very rousing and very inspiring as well. So it has a lot of great things about it, as well as being, of course, another example of a sort of a thrilling kaiju Japanese film, Godzilla film, but from 2016. So from not very long ago from this particular video, so about 4 or 5 years perhaps. So this is Shin Gojira, or Shin Godzilla. And why do I like this film very much? I think on the one hand, it is a Godzilla film, as I mentioned, and I'm a big fan of the Godzilla film series from the early works from the mid-1950s onwards, and then through the 60s, 70s, and then from the mid-80s onwards to the 90s and beyond. And then we have this film, and I haven't spoken about, for instance, the Heisei series or the Millennium series as much as I would like to on this channel, but maybe one of these days I can really sit down and talk about each of those works individually, because there is so much to talk about, as those of you who know the Godzilla films can attest to, but we'll leave that for another time, hopefully very soon on this channel. But in the meantime, we have, therefore, from a few years back, this film, Shin Gojira. And it is a film that, even for fans of the Godzilla film franchise or series, this has a lot of surprises, both in terms of how it recalls past elements and events from the history of Godzilla films, pays homage, borrows elements from the past, and uses them and utilizes them in a very fresh and innovative way in a cinematic style. So that's one aspect that I think is really wonderful. And another aspect also is while this is a Godzilla film, and while Godzilla films, as you know, have a deep, rich history, this film does many new and interesting, surprising things with creature design, with creature development, and the way that things are created, let me put it that way. And so while there is a continuity of sorts in terms of a kind of monster or kaiju type of menace that hits a particular metropolitan area in Japan, which is, I think, a line of continuity throughout the entirety of the history of Godzilla, all the way from back into 1954, of course. While there is this line of continuity, on the other hand, there is a freshness and innovativeness to the way in which this particular element of the film is being presented in this film. So I think this is a very wonderful mix of homage and paying respect to the past, but also being fresh and new and breathing new life into this particular type of film. And I really love this film for that kind of freshness and invigorating sense of awe and wonder and mystery, and therefore kind of horror and real kind of feeling of being scared, because there are so many elements that are kind of unknown. So this is a really wonderful element to this particular film, Shin Gojira. And then as far as the style of this film goes, that's another great thing. So as you know, this is from the mind of Hideaki Anno, who is perhaps so famous for the Neon Genesis Evangelion series. And for those of you who are fans of Evangelion but have not yet seen Shin Gojira or Shin Godzilla, let me tell you that you are in for a real treat, because the style and presentation and the editing and the way that the narrative progresses has a similar kind of feel to Evangelion, or perhaps more broadly to a kind of living, breathing manga, Japanese manga style, in terms of how characters are framed, how quick flashes of image are presented, but still are giving us a lot of information for us to digest, and how everything has a certain economy of style on the one hand, but still packed with a lot of dense, rich information on the other. And so there is a kind of Japanese anime or Japanese manga style to the look and feel of this that is perhaps having its most closely associated precedent as being, let's say, the style and atmosphere of something like the animated series and animated films of the world of Neon Genesis Evangelion. So that is sort of the influence and the artistic style, if you will, of Anno and company. So if you like that kind of style, then I think you will really, really enjoy Shin Godzilla very, very much. And then also this film presents, I think, a lot of interesting social elements, or speaking to elements or aspects of Japanese society. First, there is this idea of how government works, how the Japanese government works in a crisis. And of course, this is a fiction film. Of course, I understand this. But the way in which this film focuses in on the detail and the minutiae and the sort of nitty-gritty of Japanese governmental bureaucracy, and how all the various elements and bodies and organs within the infrastructure of Japanese government have to try to coordinate or try to work together and try to share information, have meetings, the kind of bureaucratic process, if you will, of making decisions, the human element, how people have to work together in a high-pressure situation, and seeing all the elements of leadership at play, both the good points and perhaps the not-so-good points, and similar sorts of things. This film really puts a kind of microscopic examination on these kinds of Japanese governmental decision-making processes, and as well as the way in which different governmental organs try to work together or are unable to work together, let me put it another way, depending on the specific situation, if you will. So this film is really fascinating in its attempt to try to show us in a very exciting, quite vivid and dynamic way the inner workings, if you will, of this kind of view of Japanese bureaucracy and government politics. So a really interesting mix of kaiju and almost a kind of government film, if you will. So I really admire this film for taking the time to try to present to us these sorts of things. I mean, and I think on a broader level, what this element of the film is essentially trying to show us, I think, is the way in which human beings have to work together in a crisis situation, how that plays out in various forms and modes and scenarios as presented by this film. Again, absolutely fascinating stuff, and it's wonderful to see that kind of attention to detail in a film like Shin Gojira or Shin Godzilla. But that's not all that I think is really worth talking about. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the fact that how this was in 2016, and as some of you may know, Japan underwent a very serious disaster situation in 2011 with respect to the very big and it was a very terrible earthquake and tsunami disaster that hit Japan, in particular the northern part of the main island of Japan in 2011, March 2011. And the various ramifications that occurred, both natural disaster and also man-made disasters that occurred as a result of, or in consequence of, or in relation to such earthquake and tsunami disaster from 2011. And so the ripple effects of that are felt in this film quite dramatically. It is hard not to be reminded of the very recent events from 2011. I mean, I was in Japan when that happened, and I still remember vividly just feeling the vibrations. It was very startling, and it was very strong even where I was in Tokyo, and that wasn't the epicenter of that particular earthquake. And Tokyo didn't experience the full calamity, if you will, of that particular event. I mean, there were more areas outside of Tokyo in Japan that were really hard hit, and so that, I think, is reflected in the feeling of a kind of disaster film that is being presented here. But it's a disaster film that does have its sense, and it has a kind of root, if you will, in this recent Japanese history that I was talking about, which is the earthquake and tsunami disaster from 2011. And so to watch this film, I think, is watching a kind of artistic representation or reflection of those very tragic events that actually befell Japan just a few years prior to the making of this film and the release of this film. And so I think this film is very significant in that it is a kind of way of expressing in these kaiju entertainment terms, of course, the kinds of trauma, national trauma, and the kinds of crisis situations that can befall a particular part of the country. And these occur because of natural disasters and also man-made occurrences and accidents and disasters in consequence of each other. And so I think that this film therefore has so much to say about, again, the crisis situation, the human condition when placed under extraordinary pressure from these crisis situations, and also the idea of what is this crisis? It is this particular issue or problem that is presented in Shin Godzilla, and that issue or problem is not just something that has certain social elements of social commentary to them, but also it's a kind of thrilling entertainment that is something that is new and fresh on the one hand, that is also recalling animation, anime, and manga on the one hand, but also is a direct tie to a very rich cinematic past that we all know, which is that of Godzilla in Japanese cinema. So this is, in essence, why I think the film Shin Godzilla is so worth checking out. It is an unbelievably effective work, and so I can't stress enough how much I really admire this work, and how much it has made me really ponder certain aspects, and also has really thrilled me and entertained me to no end. One doesn't necessarily have to have seen all of the Godzilla films in order to still be able to enjoy and appreciate this film. You can if you want, and I think that would be really great. But even for those who maybe have seen only the 1954 Gojira film, and that's it, I still think you would find so much to enjoy and to appreciate about this film. I really believe that, and so even for the most casual fan of Gojira films, I think this film is certainly worth checking out. Certainly this is something that Gojira fans should see if they haven't already, and anyone who's interested in an interesting modern look at a Japanese cinematic entertainment that is speaking to other aspects of Japanese social commentary and the like, I think Shin Godzilla is a great place to visit. So if you haven't seen this film, I strongly recommend checking out Shin Godzilla, or Shin Godzilla. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now, and so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you once again for your time. Please continue to stay safe, stay strong, and cheers.